So the goal of this talk is going to be bringing you all together literally on a picture, and hopefully give you enough so that you all can work with each other. Right?
We are at time. So let's jump straight in. We have a lot to cover in the next 40 minutes. I just want to start off by recognizing that I don't need to convince you that we are in the middle of an AI revolution, right? We've seen various articles from various analysts say that almost like 90+%, maybe 93% of enterprises are increasing their investments in AI, right? AI has moved from being something that was a niche project that was primarily for science and for some kind of decision science efforts to being at the core of the enterprise strategy and enterprise architecture, right? What that means is there is a huge top-down pressure to both develop and deliver these AI applications in production. However, as we see in the slide here, what we have observed is that it has been very hard to deploy these applications successfully in production at scale. Everybody has been able to deploy a few niche applications in their organization. A quick show of hands, how many of you have any AI applications that are deployed in production within your organization today? So, quite a few. How many of you actually have the practices to deploy these at scale, especially across from an enterprise perspective? Much smaller number of hands, but there are a few. That's great. So we are in this increasing maturity curve, and I think the goal for us is to talk about how can we help you deliver AI at scale, because what you cannot secure, you cannot scale. Now, when we talk to our customers about what is really causing the friction to getting them to deploying AI in production at scale, we arrived at 3 high-level reasons. The first, of course, that we just talked about is security, right? AI brings novel threats in addition to the traditional cyber threats that we are used to, right? In particular, models can behave unpredictably and leak data is a huge concern for many of the security officers that we talk to. The second is, with a more autonomous agentic applications, there's a lack of control and ownership, especially around how the system behaves and who has control over various parts of a multi-step agentic workflow, for example. The second is the quality part of it, right? It's, again, the unpredictability leads not just to security issues, but also to quality concerns about is the model performing with the right kind of behavior? And secondly, how do we deliver this quality and how can we automate around this versus spending huge number of hours trying to get this quality at scale? The last one is the cost of actually these LLM applications in particular, because it's expensive, right? Now, the good news is the costs have been going down 10x year on year. So hopefully over time, this will not be a factor, but today it still is one, so that is the third reason. During this conference here, you're going to learn a lot about how to improve your AI application quality and how to improve your productivity so that, and your automation, so you can deliver AI applications at scales from that perspective. There are many other sessions. In this session, we are going to focus on the first box here, which is on the security aspect. When we think of security, in this session, we're going to divide this into 2 parts. The first, Arun is going to cover a comprehensive framework to list all the security risks across the AI lifecycle and then provide a key set of controls that helps mitigate those risks. After that, I will help provide a set of best practices on how to get started with the Databricks platform and apply some of the controls that Arun would have talked about. And with that, I'll hand over to Arun to help talk about the framework.
Yeah, so Samrat, why don't you introduce yourself, because not everybody in the room knows you
sure.
well.
Thanks. I'm Samrat. I lead platform security at Databricks across both AI, serverless, and data protection aspects.
Hi, thank you, Samrat, with that introduction. My name is Arun Pamlapati. I'm Principal Security Engineer at Databricks. I am co-author of Databricks AI Security Framework, which I'm going to touch upon if you haven't heard of that. How many of you heard of Databricks AI Security Framework? Thank you. You made my day. All right, so for the rest of you, this is the time to get to know Databricks AI Security Framework. So it's a comprehensive work that I've been doing over the last 1.5 years. And it is a collaboration within Databricks, more than 30 people, security-minded people contributed to this. Outside of Databricks, there were more than 40 people, including NIST and MITRE and HITRUST, were some of the people who actually participated in this work group that I ran. So the idea is to provide customers with a comprehensive framework and make sure we recognize the risks that are there without even thinking about Databricks as the platform. So the goal is to do more of a community work, what AI system looks like, what are all the different components, what threats may be there in each of those components, and mapping to standards like, MITRE Atlas, OWASP LLM Top 10, NIST 853. I have a session today with one of the people who actually built on that in the evening. If you are into NIST 853 or some of the compliance-related organizations, you can come to that session. But the idea is to map those into 12 different components of AI system, and then we found there are 62 risks in overall, in the entire system, and then we map one of those risks to those standards where those standards are recognizing the same risks, and then we made sure we don't leave you with with those risks and then say, okay, here are the controls that would help you mitigate those risks. So those controls are also not Databricks specific. Those are general controls that any security or IT people would recognize, and you as a data science and data engineer would be able to recognize those as we go through the session today, and make sure that we leave you with how to implement those controls, how to deploy those controls if you are using Databricks as the last effort that we did. So we start with a system, and then we are going to go through risks, and we're going to understand what are the controls that you need to have, and then we'll think about how to do that in Databricks. We have all the documentation links left in against each one of those controls in the worksheets that we published recently. And then Samrat will come back and kind of emphasize on some of the key controls that you should be starting with, okay? So with that, this is the work that I talked about, this paper, once you go to that QR code, which you're going to get another opportunity to take a picture of at the end, and from that document, you will be able to actually go to this worksheet, which has each and every risk and the control description and the links and everything that you need to know if you want to operationalize this, right? So as we move into the AI system, at a very high level, you see these 4 broad components, right? 4 broad sections. So when I asked about data engineers, you fall into that very beginning. You are the key support team or key team that is bringing the data so that you can actually make sense out of the data and build data intelligence out of that. And then the second set of people are the operations. Is going to be data operations, which is basically model operations, which is going to be building, evaluating, everything that goes into data science side is the second piece. And then once you build that, it needs to be deployed at scale. That's where it's going to be deployment and serving of these models is going to come in. Or sometimes you may be just connected to an endpoint. That is also part of that, right? If there is a Gen AI model from Azure OpenAI, someone needs to kind of provision that. Someone needs to share those credentials, make sure they are safe and all of that. So that goes into the third part. And the last bit is, of course, at scale, basically how I do CI/CD, all the automation that goes into and what platform compliance that the platform that is running your AI system, you need to make sure you have those in place. So that doesn't help put the picture, it just boxes. So let's start with how AI system comes to be, right? So this is the important piece where we break the AI system into multiple components. So you start off with like, a platform. It may be DIY platform, some operations, but most important thing is you're going to bring the data in into your system. So that's the first component. And then you are going to do all kinds of transformations, extracting the, the value out of the data by kind of, featureizing and all the things that you do as a data engineer that goes into that second component. And then you're going to basically provide this data, and maybe it can be synthetic data. So that's something that you need to build off of, and then you need to catalog that data so the rest of the organization knows about the data, existence of the data. You need to set up some kind of controls on that. You need to label the data, and everything that needs to be governed for the data. So that is your left side, the first box, the big box. When we go back to this picture, that's the left box that kind of composes of those 4 boxes, okay? And then starts your model operations, where you are basically taking the data, you're training the models, or you're taking some kind of external model, putting the data in front of that model. Remember, your traditional ML, is still there. That's where most of the production is actually happening, right? Gen AI is something that you are experimenting and bringing in, but your custom model that are ML, they are going to be part of your AI system, right? Majority of the time, what you see on the Twitter and some kind of PhD blogs is that when they talk about model security, this is the box they are talking about. That is important for that, for the research, important to protect those. But talking about model security is talking about putting a, some kind of armor on a king and say we protected the king. There is a lot of things that go around the king to make sure we are also protecting, the perimeter and everything that goes into to protect the king, right? So models are important. They are your digital twins. They need to be, there is your intellectual property put into those models. So yes, you need to protect them, but data is also super important that you're protecting, because that's the data that's going to go into your models. That's the data that is going to be exposed to the agents, and you need to make sure that is also taken care of, right? So once you have the models, then you're going to give it to your infrastructure team. That's third box, where the infrastructure team is going to operationalize this, build endpoints out of that. This is where your models come alive. These are the models that go into your apps. These are the models that are going to be integrated into your upstream, downstream systems. And you need to make sure there is similar guardrails and similar protections, controls that you have in your traditional applications. As Samrat mentioned, AI is your part of your enterprise software now. That's why the security is more important than maybe a couple of years ago, when AI was output of AI was kind of a PDF file from a data scientist. So there is less emphasis and less need for worrying about the PDF file ending up on somebody's wrong inbox. But here, if something goes wrong, everything upstream, downstream, and data exfiltration is going to happen through these systems, right? So once you have this system, that's when your external applications are going to interact with, users are going to interact with through prompt engineering, through inference requests, if it is traditional ML, and that goes into your live system that is productionized. So with that, now AI system is running, and the agents are talking to your data. Remember, without data being put in front of your AI, it is just general intelligence. That means you can ask and do your kids' homework, but you cannot ask and answer your enterprise questions, right? So to get value from that AI, you are going to get the data which is in the catalogs and files and everywhere that is in the enterprise, and you need to put it in front of AI so that you can answer you can answer the questions with intelligence. So you need to monitor that AI, and then there's going to be feedback loop. So as the apps come in and talk to your system, there's going to be up and down, like, yes, this is the answer that I'm looking for, or there's some kind of feedback. That becomes raw data that goes back into your rest of the system, right? So now you're going to put all of that on some kind of, you're going to operationalize that with some CI/CD process. You're going to put it on a platform, and the platform needs to have some kind of security controls, right? So this is the big picture of, I call AI system. This is what we in the enterprise need to be caring about, not just the model security. Model security is important, but everything else around the model needs to be important, needs to be taken care of. So when we did the study, we took the whole thing, because the approach for enterprises, you all know, is that defense in depth. You cannot just put 1 or 2 controls and hope that everything going to go well, right? So to do defense in depth, first of all, you need to look at threats at each one of these components. So as part of the cataloging of each of these risks by studying for last almost 2 years, we found the blue numbers are 12 different components, right, in the AI system. And then at each one of those numbers, you see an orange color alert, which is basically the number of threats that we identified in each one of those. So here is the comprehensive list of threats that we recognized as part of that. So each one of those 12 components, as you can see, at raw data, we said 11 risks. So these are the full list of this. These risks, each one of those is described in that Excel spreadsheet or Google Sheet. If you are on Google, we publish both versions, and described at length what this risk is, why and where they appear, and who else is talking about it. Is HITRUST talking about it? It is NIST 853 talking about this, or some other OWASP LLM talking about this risk. So we kind of catalog those so that you can, if you're following one of those standards, NIST CSF 2.0, you can work backwards, right? So as I said, we didn't want to leave you with only risks. We want to give you controls. That's why we are the platform. We are the vendor. We are supposed to provide you, assist you in deploying those. So here are the 64 controls. Again, you don't see Databricks name in them. That was by intention because it's a community work. We wanted to provide for anybody who is practicing AI, DIY tools, even our competition, we will have, armed with this, you can ask the right questions, saying that, hey, we want to know how to deploy this control on your platform. If you're using Databricks, you ask our people, you ask us, or you can go to that Excel spreadsheet, and there will be documentation link for each one of the Databricks clouds. Like, if you're on AWS, there is a link. You will find how to configure Databricks to deploy these controls, right? So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Samrat, and to kind of go through some of the best practices or some of the controls that you should be thinking about, because we don't want to just leave you with some Excel spreadsheets and some links and everything. So Samrat, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Arun. Well, as the slide says, that's a lot. AI security is not optional, but then wrangling 64 controls across your entire lifecycle, software development lifecycle, is hard. So how can we help you get started? So here, we're not going to go through all 64 controls, obviously, but we want to help you get started by focusing on 3 broad focus areas and key controls that are enabled through the Databricks platform that help you get the most proverbial bang for the buck, right? So the first one is a broad area where, as Arun talked about, is building and deploying on a secure platform. So this, and the second dimension is to make sure that you have the policies and the controls in place to have an end-to-end governance of platform, data, and models, all 3 together. These 2 boxes together form what I would call as the security scaffolding, right? So effectively, it's the sort of set of things that are the preventative measures, as well as some of the more deterministic detective measures that you have that help create the housing in which your intelligent applications can live in effectively, right, in a way that is secure. However, even after you achieve this, right, one of the key things about these new LLM-based applications, the Gen AI applications, whether they're agents or just applications that are using these Gen AI models, is that they are unpredictable, right? All of you would have done some level of perhaps system prompts, et cetera, to constrain what the models are doing, right? You might have even implemented LLM as a judge by putting another model in front of it. But despite all those steps, when I talk to the people who are much smarter than me in this domain, all of them tell me that there is no 100% guarantee that this thing is going to work as you thought it would, right? So one of the key dimensions of security here is for you to have a practice, operational practice, to monitor and audit your model performance from a security perspective, which is from an adversarial attack perspective, from a data leakage perspective, all of those aspects, you must have this control in place through the life cycle from the start, because you have to reduce the risk before you take it to production. But even post-production, you need to be continuously be monitoring for this, because things can change over time, right? Based upon both the change in your model, but also the change, like, development of new threats, for example, in how prompts are can be used to game these models. So let's start with the first one, building and deploying on a secure platform. Platform security, for those who have been in that area, obviously is a vast area on its own. But from an AI perspective, I would say there are 3 core things that you need to think about. The first is you want to run on a hardened runtime on Databricks. The good news with Databricks is we do the hardening for you, especially if you're on serverless. We do most of the hardening for you, from making sure that all the data is encrypted at rest, you got the right kind of isolation of your containers, that you've got proper privilege management of each of the containers, so on and so forth. The area where you need to focus on, and I'll go through the next few steps, is making sure you've got a secured perimeter. Why is this important is because you may have not thought of like a secure perimeter being a must-have before, because you're building an application, you know what your application is doing. Here, because the behavior is somewhat unpredictable, again, the scaffolding, putting the perimeter together is very important. And lastly, you have to encrypt your data. Like, one of the things we have noticed with these applications is in order to build these models, right, correctly, you can no longer just bring masked data to the cloud. You can no longer have redacted data to the cloud. You have to bring in the full fidelity data. So it becomes even more important to make sure that you don't have side channel access. Like, you don't want your infra admin gaining access to your employee records, for example, or to your financial result kind of data sets, right? So securing the perimeter, what does Databricks provide for you? And I'm not going to dwell into a lot of depth into each of these because of time limitations, but I just want to talk through a few key things. We are providing a serverless platform for most of your AI functionality, right? And that's a great thing because it's a hardened platform to begin with. You have to have less things that you have to worry about in terms of security. But one of the key things about moving out of your network is what happens to the firewalls that your IT maintain for you. We now restore that functionality through a feature called serverless egress controls. It's built in and optimized for Databricks and helps you control all your outbound connections across 3 surface areas. The internet, which is the obvious one, but also to cloud storage, making sure that your applications cannot access like public buckets out there, which have not been sanctioned. And lastly, even on the Databricks API surface. So for example, you can't have your model call the files API of another workspace in a different account and exfiltrate data that way, right? So this is very important for 2 reasons. The first is, of course, to mitigate data exfiltration risks by somebody gaming your agents to do things that they were not supposed to do. But secondly, it's also very important for you to secure your software supply chain, because now with this control, for example, you can ensure that your systems, when you're building them, when you're deploying them, do not have access to untrusted repos, because you don't know what's getting downloaded in many of these development lifecycle. So you can cut off connections to all public repos and make sure only scanned and approved binaries are accessible through your private repos. And you can access these private repos with a new feature that we have now, which is the ability to configure private link from your serverless runtime into your VPC. So if you have an Artifactory there, then you can just configure the private link to connect to that.
Yeah. So this also helps with, like, if you have a model like DeepSeek, and if you are another third-party model from Hugging Face, and if you want to bring it into your infrastructure, you need to make sure the model is isolated in 3 layers of isolation, cannot reach into your data assets without you proactively configuring them, and it doesn't exfiltrate the data without you knowing back to the attacker's system, right? Like, that's why sometimes on Hugging Face they may plant a model and it may be attractive for your business and you may want to bring it, but you need to have those controls in place in your system before you put them into your system.
Absolutely. Thanks, Arun. The second thing to consider is DOS attacks, especially if your models are being exposed close to the internet. Like, hopefully nobody's putting the model APIs or the model interfaces directly on the internet with a thin UI. Hopefully you've got some app in front of it. But even with that, it can still be subject to DOS attacks. And therefore, we have a component called AI Gateway as part of our model serving infrastructure. And that AI Gateway does give you very basic per user and per endpoint ability to define throttles. And that helps you mitigate risk from DOS attacks, especially at the AI layer. And lastly, here's a new feature which is in private preview. At this point is a context-based access. So I'll give you an example of why this is important in the AI world. Back in the day when you were using Databricks just for doing your notebooks, you could just say, oh, this is my back office. I'm just going to make it private and just keep it there. But with AI, you suddenly need to connect it with other systems. So for example, one of our customers, they want to connect some of their models to their Salesforce application in the cloud, in SaaS. Now, Salesforce is a multi-tenant app. So even if you provide some credentials to connect to your Databricks, you're not 100% sure which tenant in Salesforce this is coming from, because they all share the same IP. So they want to reduce the exposure and say, I only want these 2 models to be accessible from Salesforce. I don't want to open up my entire workspace to Salesforce, right? And now we are building this capability for you to do just that. So you can now open up very specific endpoints in your workspace based upon the identity of the client as well as the network source of the client. Right? This feature is right now in private preview. What we have in GA is the ability to keep things private or define IP access lists at a coarse-grained level for your entire workspace. So I talked about platform security, and you were like, this is not AI security, right? Like, except for maybe perhaps a little bit of the AI gateway. But it's actually very critical to AI. And for anybody who's been working with regulated data, so here's a customer, which is National Australia Bank. You might have heard of. They're one of the largest banks in Australia. And as you can imagine, as a bank, they're highly regulated. And they were able to actually deploy GenAI capabilities within their organization by leveraging these very features. And that's what they called out. When we said, OK, what enabled you to get to production, they've called out things like serverless egress control, private link connectivity, as well as like AI gateway in there, right, as key capabilities that enable them to get there. So let's talk a bit about governance. And the governance has 3 components again. You must make sure that everybody's properly authenticating to your AI endpoints. And this is pretty standard. I'm not going to go into details there. You have to do MFA OAuth is a better way to authenticate. Where I'm going to focus a bit more on is on fine-grained access control through the AI lifecycle to make sure that everything is properly governed there. And lastly, this is a new feature that we have just launched very recently. It's that your AI agent is running with the right authority. What do we mean by that? Let's take an example where I've got an HR bot in my enterprise to help employees, right? And it helps you understand your compensation and what's going on. If it runs with the service principle and it has access to everybody's compensation, right? I could, through some appropriate prompting, create a confused deputy attack, effectively, in security terms, which means that I can get Arun's compensation through that HR bot. And Arun is obviously not happy about that, right? So we need to prevent that from happening. We need to prevent this confused deputy kind of issues, and we need to mitigate those risks. We need to push the access control away from the model trying to do the right thing to your backend being able to act correctly on this, right? So that's very important.
So agent is representing you. So agent should not have more permissions than you just because it's an agent, right? So when you are asking an agent a question, agent should say this is Jane, and then agent should represent Jane when it is asking for data, and the system that is providing the data should only return the data that Jane would know if they ran a SQL query, right? So that's the purpose of that OBO on behalf of.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a bit more. But of course, we'll start with the heart of our governance story, which is Unity Catalog. I don't need to introduce Unity Catalog to any of you, so I'm not going to spend time on that. I just want to talk about a few new capabilities that we think are particularly relevant from an AI landscape perspective. The first one is attribute-based access controls. This feature is now in what we call as beta, which is like a very early preview state that you can start playing around with. And what it actually allows you to do is you can define tags in your data sets, like, for example, PII tags. And then you can define dynamic policies that is given a tag, who should have access to it, should it be masked, and so on and so forth. Right? This is very critical because when you train on this data, you want to make sure that only the models that are meant to be trained on PII have access to PII. Nothing else has access to PII, right? So that is very critical, and this allows you to do this at scale, effectively. It was a very hard thing to do if you had to do per model, you have to define an ACL that was very static, right? So these dynamic policies are very important, right? And to help you with this tagging effort, because it could be a major effort for you to tag, we now have a new feature again in beta called data classification that is basically an AI model that helps classify your data according to various types, including identifying PII. Now, just as with any model, it may not be 100% accurate, so therefore a human in the loop is a very important thing to make sure that your tagging is accurate eventually, right? And lastly, Unity Catalog offers integrated lineage between model and data. So for example, from a model to its, like to its parameters, a feature store, and how that is derived. So you get an integrated lineage, which is very important for you to determine model behavior and understand what the model has access to effectively, right? And as I mentioned, the key reasons why you want this is you want to minimize access to sensitive data from less predictable applications, and you want to make sure that you have a good way to do root cause analysis when the model is misbehaving, because you can identify drift over time in terms of like what data was being used to train the model. Second thing, I'll bring back AI Gateway. You'll see AI Gateway show up in multiple places because it solves many problems. Is you want to, of course, Unity Catalog helps you govern everything across your lifecycle from data access to model access. But once you have deployed the model in production, then you still need to be able to determine, you configure access control to the serving endpoint. And that is done through an endpoint ACL feature that we have. And on top of that, the model itself or the agent would need access to other systems like a model behind the scene. And so we provide you with the ability to securely configure credentials and not have the models have access to the credential. Actually, we hide the credential away from your agents or the models through the AI Gateway. So the model or a credential can just call the AI Gateway to get access to downstream systems. And this is the on behalf of capability that, that we just referred to earlier, right? And over there, we're talking about the agent itself can assume the identity. Think of it like those who are familiar with this identity assumption or I am role assumption from the AWS world. It's very similar in concept. What are you running as? And effectively, the agent can run as a service principal when it's talking to shared resources, but it can run as you when it is having to talk to data that belongs to you as a user. So therefore, if your backend systems for those which are like sensitive user-oriented information should only grant access to the users and not to the service principal. Therefore, the agent has to use this particular downscoped user token that is issued that gives access to very specific entities on behalf of the user in order to gain access. And this again provides a guardrail effectively, not in the context of like the classic AI guardrail, but in terms of security guardrail to make sure that the agent behaves correctly. So the last part of it, talking about monitoring and auditing, which as I mentioned is very important. It's the last but definitely not the least part of the security here. Of course, you're going to enable and monitor Unity Catalog audit logs end to end because you want to understand what has been accessed, particularly at runtime. You must have a sense of what data is being accessed, particularly after things have been deployed over there. But it's important that you understand how your model is behaving, and the part that I was talking about, which is non-deterministic 100% because it's the intelligent part of your application. How is that behaving? You must understand that end to end. So you must establish a baseline of what the model behavior is at the time of development. And this can be done by creating the right kind of metrics and measures that you can use to establish that baseline, right? You can also configure signatures in MLflow, for example. So all of that helps you establish a baseline. And then you have to compare that baseline through the life cycle. And then even post deployment in production, you have to continue monitoring this because things may change after you have deployed and you have to see whether after deployment is the model behaving in a way that is insecure. So let me talk about a few capabilities within the MLflow framework that, and as you know, Databricks provides a managed MLflow service. So with the MLflow framework, there is auto-logging, which has always been there, and that allows you to capture lineage, hyperparameters, metrics files to establish the baseline for a model. But now with MLflow 3.0, which just launched very recently, we now have MLflow tracing. And this is an end-to-end observability system for your generative AI application. So for example, if you look at the screenshot on the right, it gives you the full trace of a particular RAG agent, and you're able to trace every step of the RAG agent. You're able to see the intermediate results, the outputs, and also which documents it's retrieving, what data is it accessing. All of this now suddenly becomes available to you to understand and then capture as a metric and as a trace. So then if the system starts behaving differently, you can compare against your baseline trace to understand the risk and harden against potential adversarial attacks, as well as if you need to harden your, harden your system prompt, so to make it better, you can also use this as a way to do that. Lastly, what happens when you deploy to production? So MLflow helps you all the way till deployment in production. So, but you want to, as I said, continue monitoring it. So again, the AI gateway comes to the rescue here one more time. You are able to now, by default, it enables the usage auditing. So when you deploy in production, it comes with AI gateway, and you get various users like classic audit log kind of metrics out of it. Who accessed when, what was called, so on and so forth. However, one of the key features that it has is the concept of inference tables, which you can enable. And when you enable this inference tables feature, it actually logs both the user prompt as well as the response payload from your application or from the model, right? This information can obviously contain sensitive data in itself, both the prompt as well as the payload. So again, this data is not stored in some random place. It is stored in a Unity catalog governed location, right? And subject to your Unity catalog access policies, right? So to summarize, you have to monitor for all your sensitive data leaks through the lifecycle of the product. You need to monitor for what the system behaves against adversarial attacks. So you need to do the red teaming up front and make sure that this output from those adversarial attacks are captured in your metrics, and you have established a baseline against it, and you have to continue to look at that and make sure that you're using all of this to harden and to enhance your system prompting. One thing which I did not talk about, but I just will touch upon to end it, is that your system prompts should be hidden from the vast majority of your users, because that's the core of how you're controlling for some of this behavior. So you can do that by making sure your models are not directly exposed to the wide users, but that you have an application layer in between that only allows user prompts to be set and not system prompts. With that, I'll hand it back to Arun to help wrap this up.
So thank you, Samrat. So we only covered maybe about 9 or 10 controls of 64 controls that are out there. So this is taking that picture AI system. This is the first time I'm actually now bringing Databricks capabilities. At each one of these components, there is a Databricks capability that you are all familiar with, and they come with security and monitoring and governance that is needed for AI system. And if you observe, I've been saying AI system. It is by intention. We want to think of AI as a system, not as a model. Model is just a simple part of entire AI system, and we need to make sure we address the entire AI system security, right? So if you want to download the paper, I know we went really fast. There is a lot of good work that went in, thanks to all the contributors. You will be able to get a 8-page PDF file. You can put it with Notebook LLM and listen to it on your commute. I wouldn't recommend you reading the whole paper, even though I am the co-author of it. There is Execute ebook that I would recommend you to read. Yeah, you can eat it. Read it. And then the PDF, Excel and Google Docs sheets are available. The links from that. That is the most comprehensive one. That's the one that you want to share with your colleagues. Think about, hey, here are the risks. Did we think about all these risks? And it's okay if you, if you ignore or if you say this doesn't apply to us, but knowing that these exist and then knowingly making the decision is more important. And to give you and help you with operationalizing this framework, walks you through, the worksheets walk you through a process of taking a use case, looking at how you're deploying and using AI, and then you can filter down based on the way you are deploying which risks apply to you. Because let's take a simple example. Model theft is a risk, but if you're using Azure OpenAI endpoint, the theft part of the model is responsibility of Azure OpenAI. It's not your responsibility, right? But the security credentials that you got are responsibility for you to protect those credentials and safely store them in AI gateway and make sure you are providing that access control to your employee, so that all of that shared responsibility is also discussed in that worksheet and in the paper, so that you know which one you own, which one the vendor owns, which one the endpoint provider owns, and then you can put this to work. With that, I'll leave you with the resources that are out there. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, we'll stand outside. I think we are at time, but we can answer those questions outside.
This was value to you. Yeah, and please provide your feedback through the app. Thank you.